Good morning, everybody. We're back at the Shepherd Station. We're welcoming you back to our show. I'm your host, Eric Duhame, and with me, as always, are my co-host, Andy Hughes and Thomas Brown. We have an outstanding show for you today. First of all, we're coming to you from the Stockyard in Headland, Alabama on the Square. It's 24 East Church Street on the Square in Alabama. Come by and, in Headland. Come by and see us. Great sandwiches, great coffee, great place to hang out. If you can't come see us, we get all our coffee from Mineral City Coffee Works in Dothan, Alabama, downtown. Zach and Destiny are outstanding. They roast everything in-house. If you can't see us, go by and see them. We'd love to see you. We have a very, very exciting show for you today. I'm really excited for this. We have with us via Zoom, Jared Hudson, former U.S. Navy SEAL, owner of the Shooting Institute. He has another company that has an outstanding mission, and we're really going to dive into that pretty hard. It's Covenant Rescue Group. And then he is an amazingly strong man of faith that we're going to talk about in depth with him as well. So let's just jump right into it. Jared, welcome to the show.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me.
So we got into this. Me and Andy were talking one day, and we were like, we'd really like to get this guy. I've been following you for a little while on the Shooting Institute on social media.
Watch your Sunday sermons.
Yeah, week. Absolutely. I watch those quite a bit.
Oh, the Sunday brief or whatever.
The Sunday brief. Yeah.
Sometimes we just do a rerun because it's too much between either travel for work or the kids to get one recorded. So I'm glad that hopefully y'all hadn't seen too many reruns recently.
No, I hadn't come across that, but it does seem like, talking to you the past few days, you are a very, very busy individual. So I can understand putting the reruns out.
Yeah, we're full tilt. There's no doubt about that.
Well, just to dive into you a little bit, can you give us a little bit of background on yourself? Start with, I don't want to go too much into your childhood. I mean, good childhood, upbringing, where are you from and all that?
Yeah, no. So, long story short, and I always start off with this because I think it's most important. And you've already mentioned, man of faith, but I like to preface what that actually means. It means that Jesus came to this earth. I believe that Jesus came to this earth, lived a perfect life, died, and rose again on the third day for my sins and yours, and it's through him we're set free, right? So it didn't end with Jesus coming to earth, right? It didn't end with Jesus dying on the cross, and it actually ended when he rose from the grave and ascended into heaven, conquering, death and sin ultimately for all of the world. And it's through him that we have the opportunity to be one with God again, right? He bridged that gap. So when you say man of faith, I always like to preface it with that. That's what I believe. I grew up that way. A lot of people don't have the opportunity to grow up like that. My dad, he's got I forget his higher level of education, if it's a PhD or a master's, it doesn't matter. But he has one. It's in divinity. He's a pastor. So I grew up with him teaching me. My grandparents are the same way. My aunts and uncles. We have our family is very Christ-rooted, Christ-oriented, as Paul would say, Christ and Christ crucified. So I was raised in that. So in Proverbs, it says, train up a child in the way they'll go, and when they're old, they won't depart from it. If you want to really get if you look at the foundation of who Jared Hudson is, right, or anything in my life, it is Christ, and the reason is because we had a family that truly believed that. Raise a child in the way they'll go, and they're old, they won't depart from it. Doesn't mean I've always been perfect, right? We all mess up, and we constantly sin. Paul says, I do what I don't want to do, and I don't do what I want to do, right? It's constantly the flesh and the spirit. So with that being said, I feel like that all the time. I'm definitely the chief of sinners, right? As Paul talks about, like I'm a terrible person outside of the person of Jesus Christ. So as a child, growing up, I was taught and to believe that, was rooted in that, and I came to know the Lord at age 7. Well, it's really 6 when I talked to my parents. I remember it vividly. 7, I believe, is when I got baptized, because around a birthday time frame. But I came to know the Lord, and by asking Jesus into my heart, going through the process, and then lived that out through the rest of my life. So my childhood was very, I don't want to say church-centric. It was my parents, my grandparents, my family teaching me that relationship with Christ. My family is originally, my dad's side of the family is originally from Lynchburg, Virginia, which is actually where I was born. My mom's side of the family is from Nakaloo Falls area of Alabama, so up near Gadsden, Fort Payne, kind of heading up that area. I don't know if y'all know where that is.
Yep.
That's where Fort Payne was a little bit north of where we're from. That's where the band Alabama. That's where all those guys are from, right? So up there, the Lookout Mountain area, and mom and dad met when they were in college together at Liberty University. My dad, that's where he got all of his degrees from, and my mom, the same. She attended there. She didn't finish, but that's how they met in Virginia, Lynchburg, Virginia, where Liberty is. And, surprisingly enough, I actually got my master's from Liberty as well when I went back to school to finish it. So the family from that area moved here to the Birmingham area where I'm at now for my dad's work, probably when I think I was in the 7th or 8th grade. And, this is kind of where I spent my high school days, which is what most people think about when they're growing up around this area. Of Alabama. What'd you do in high school? You played ball. I played football. You played baseball, wrestle, hunt, fish, do all the normal stuff a kid does. And, get into working out, doing all that. And that was kind of my life here. We went to Gardendale First Baptist Church, which is where kind of my youth group time. That's where we grew up, spent a lot of time in that church with solid pastors and youth pastors who would pour into kids' lives, which helped, root us even more. Right now, that's outside of our parents, who's the main hierarchy that God's placed over anybody's life is your mom and your dad. Right. Just so you know, for your listener, that's the first commandment that deals with people. Right. So you've got the first 4 commandments deal with God. Right. And then the 5th commandment, the first one that deals with people is honor your father and mother, which I find pretty interesting because the next one is don't murder. Right. So even before don't murder, honor
thy father and
mother.
Yeah.
And it's, you see that with Cain and Abel, right? If Cain would have honored his father and mother, he never would have killed Abel because Abel was one of their children, right? So I just find that interesting that, you have your father and mother, you honor them, you learn from them, but then there's also other people that pour into your life, coaches that I had that I played ball with, or that played ball under, and then youth ministers here. So that's kind of just real general in a nutshell. The base is Christ, but had a lot of people much wiser than me pour into my life in a way, both inside the family and outside of the family, poured into my life in a way that I could now say, raise up a child in the way they should go, and when they're old, they won't depart from it. So that's just, an abbreviated childhood thing real quick.
So let me understand this. So not only do you were in the SEALs, successful military career. You have basically 2 companies that you're running, and you're very busy with that, but you also hold a master's from Liberty.
I do, yeah. So I finished my business degree. Well, I was in the SEAL teams when I finished my bachelor. I didn't have much left on it, and the Navy would cover that if you wanted to attend active duty. And it was around that time where you could do pretty much anything with the exception of a few types of degrees online. Yeah. So I finished my business degree online. And then when I finished that, I wound up leaving the SEAL teams, starting my business, and decided to use my GI Bill to, go get my master's. I was a law enforcement officer at the time, obviously. Got out of the SEAL teams, became a law enforcement officer here in Alabama. And in the process of that, I started working on my master's, and I did my master's at Liberty online. And I want to say it was like 60 hours. Your PhD is like 120 hours, right? But it was like 60 hours worth of school. So it took me, I think it took me a total of 3 years to complete. But yeah, I was able to get a master's in business, which helped me in running my business, and now running the nonprofit, starting the nonprofit and running the nonprofit Covenant Rescue Group here. So it has been valuable.
So I want to dive right into your professional side.
Okay.
And this is I was unaware that you were actually a full-time law enforcement officer for a little while.
I was, yeah. So I was full-time law enforcement for a while, and then when my business kind of had enough kick in that I was like, hey, I'm going to leave doing full-time law enforcement. I can make more with the business. And so I left and worked the business side, finishing out my master's at the time, and maintained my A post credits, being a part-time, or actually a reserve with the county that I ran for sheriff in. We were talking about a little bit earlier here at Jefferson County under Sheriff Mike Hale and then Sheriff Mark Petway, who beat me this last go around. I was a reserve under him for a little while as well to maintain my A post credits. Currently, I'm a part-time officer with the state of Alabama, and a TFO with Homeland Security.
I got you. So, backing up, going into your military side of things, obviously you have a heart for service. So, what made you decide to go into the SEALs? What made you decide to choose the Navy?
Man, that's a great question. So when I was when I was younger, when I graduated, or right before I graduated high school, I looked at I wanted to go be a Marine. I wanted to be a Marine sniper. Wound up becoming a SEAL sniper, right? So I wanted to be a Marine sniper, and I went to the recruiter. My parents signed off, and I'd signed the paperwork to go to MEPS and join the Marines. And for whatever reason, I can't remember why, but I decided, hey, I don't want to do that. And I actually went to fire college in Fort Payne. We were talking about Fort Payne a little bit earlier. I went to fire college in Fort Payne, Alabama. Didn't go to the Marine Corps. Did that for 1 year and did a mission trip with a church. Long story short, did a mission trip with our church. Went over to Africa. Went to South Africa. We flew through Joburg, but and stayed there for a night or two, but got to experience that for the first time, I guess, and worked in where were we at? Namibia and Angola on the border. Those wars and stuff going on. And I remember one night in Africa as I was sitting there just praying. We're on a mission trip, digging wells, and I don't know if any of y'all have ever been to Africa or if anybody listening has, but the stars in Africa, there's not a lot of ambient light like we have in our cities around here. It's like being out in the country times 10, right? You can see tons of stars in the sky. And I mean, it's as black could be at night, with the exception of the stars you see. And I remember sitting out and thinking of that and looking at those stars thinking, wow, you can see a lot of stars. And the Lord just laid on my heart, hey, you need to change course. You need to do something different, make an impact in a different way. And I didn't really know what it was or know what it meant. Came back home and talked with my dad, and my dad sat down and had a conversation with me and said, well, and I said, Dad, I really think it's the military. I'm 19 at the time. And he said, well, look, there's nothing wrong with military service, but if you do something different, do something special. That's what he said. There's a sign at the old Bud's Grinder. They've redone everything now, but the old Bud's Grinder, it says, be somebody special. That's what it's engraved. And, I said, well, what do you mean? He said, look, anybody can join the military, do something special operations. George Bush Jr. had just at the time started where you could get a contract to go into any special operations community, with the exception of MARSOC, because MARSOC wasn't really stood up at the time. They were kind of going through their process. MARSOC is the Marine Raiders, or what would have been in Force Recon, right? You hear guys say, oh, I'm a Marine Recon. That doesn't mean that they were special operations. You have recon battalions. Force Recon was the Marine Special Operations, but now it's Marine Raiders. That is Marine Special Operations Command. So that was the only one that didn't have a contract because they were not really in existence, if that makes sense. At the time, they were kind of being stood up. But you had Air Force PJs, Navy SEALs. You get a Ranger contract, and you get what's called I think it was called an X-ray contract for the Green Berets or for the Army. So as I looked at all those, the hardest one to obtain was the SEAL contract because of the testing scores and the swim. That was the main thing. The runs were a little bit faster, and so I said, you know what? As I went to all those recruiters, I said, I'll just start with a SEAL, and if I pass that and get that contract, hadn't been training or anything like that other than my normal workouts, then I'll go to the Navy and I'll be a SEAL. That's God answering that for me. If I don't pass that one, I go to the next hardest one, which was PJs and the combat controllers. And if I don't do that one, I go to the next one, which happened to be the Green Beret. The Ranger contract was the easiest to obtain. So sorry for the Rangers on here. And it was. So people always ask us about Rangers. I said there are guys who haven't been to Ranger school or not Ranger tabbed who are more Rangers than a lot of guys who are Ranger tabbed. So Ranger is just a leadership course in the Army. Like we have SEALs especially officers that go to Ranger school. The real Rangers are those guys who go to regiment, and they might not go through Ranger school, but I think now they go through something called. I got a buddy that's an instructor over at Ranger School, but I think he said it's RASP, or it was RASP, Ranger Assessment Selection Process. And that's how they actually get selected to go to regiment to be that advanced light infantry unit that the Rangers are. So that being said, that's kind of the process to become that. So when everybody thinks Ranger, they think, oh, that guy's got a Ranger tab. He's a Ranger. No, not really.
He just went
He
through
went to
Ranger
Ranger
school.
He's
school.
Ranger qualified.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've got guys who are in regiment that are way more a Ranger as we think about it, than those who have been to Ranger school and are rocking have that rocker on their shoulder. So
Right.
I didn't understand that at the time. And I don't even know how that contract worked, if it was a RASP contract or just a contract to go, the 82nd Airborne and then get to go to Ranger School and come back to the 82nd. But that was something that kind of happened for a while with guys. So that being said, I passed the SEAL test and I went the SEAL route. So
How long were you in the SEALs?
I was in the SEAL teams for a little over 6 years, and I was actually diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. They linked it to the anthrax vaccine. You cannot be a SOCOM or JSOC operator and be an insulin-dependent diabetic. So I was a sniper school instructor at the time as I was going through, and they said you can stay in sniper school, and be non-deployable. I've been a non-deployable SEAL, and 20 years, all I would be was a chief. So I got out as a petty officer first class. My next step was chief, and that's as far as I could make it. SOCOM Care Coalition, and people don't realize this. I don't know about the regular military, but SOCOM takes care of their guys when something like this happens. SOCOM Care Coalition stepped in and helped me out tremendously. They hired an attorney for me. The guy's actually in the Birmingham area, great guy. And then he did a lot of stuff pro bono as well. I won't use his name on this because I don't know if he wants to be known or whatever, but he's a former Marine. Yeah. They did a lot of stuff for me. And long story short, wound up getting a med retirement that gives me the retirement IDs. Got a VA percentage, 100% with a VA, and a what's it like health, TRICARE or whatever it is for my family. Right? I didn't have kids at the time, but I had a wife, and that was something important that they pushed for. So that was SOCOM Care Coalition, and this specific attorney who donated effort and time to make sure that my medical process was taken care of, because I broke my back a few times in the team, broke my neck, have had a couple knee surgeries. I mean, I had a process, so they added it all up, and I was able to, get that. So.
Right. Well, let me ask you, and I feel like I'm kind of hogging the table here. We all have an equal say here. Earlier I said we're all equal at this table. That's, we put this together equally. But I feel like I'm kind of hogging this up because I've got this list of stuff. Are there any deployments that you can talk about or that you're willing to talk about? And I don't want to spend too much time on your SEAL time because I do want to get into some other stuff. But, how many deployments have you had, or, anything that you might want to talk about as far as it stood out while you were in the SEAL teams?
Yeah. Long story short, the way the Navy works, you're on a sea duty or a shore duty. A shore duty is might be an instructor gig, right? That being said, being a sniper school instructor is considered a sea duty because you're always having to travel back and forth from one place to where a sniper school is at. That being said, in the SEAL teams, the common rotation for your number teams is basically 6 months deployed and then an 18-month training cycle, 6 months deployed, 18-month training cycle. You can just kind of do that over and over again. And then for your color teams is your squadrons, they're kind of on a 4-month rotation where you standby, deployed, and then professional development or unit level training, just like you would do during that 18 months in a number team. So with that being said, the way the war worked, dude, you're going on, you might do a 6-month deployment and you come back, but then you wind up having to go do, a JSET for a month, So, I mean, which is just like a joint training with a foreign force or something. So because of the war and the way the war was, guys were constantly rotating over, and you could almost stay deployed all the time if you wanted to. So for me, I got to go on a bunch of different deployments, different countries, some of them for 2 weeks, some of them for 6 months, some of them for 3 months, just depending on what it was and what the cycle was. But probably the coolest place I went, and we did a lot of cool things there, but was in South Korea and working around the demilitarized zone up there with the ROC SEALs. And I say coolest. That was
Now, for those that
combat
are
ball.
listening, explain what the rock seals are.
Rock Republic of Korea.
Korea,
So that's your South Korea SEALs. Those dudes are harder than a coffin nail, man. Those dudes are tough guys. I like working with those guys. They're probably my favorite partner for us. That's why I liked them. And that country is actually pretty heavily Christian, for all intents and purposes. So I enjoyed going to Korea. I actually went to Korea twice. When I was there, it was snowing and cold one time, and then one time it was more. It's kind of like the seasons here, right? Like a springtime, dogwoods blooming. It was a beautiful place, and I love Korean food. Not the squids and all that crap. I'm talking like pork they cook in front of the pork and all that. That's so. But that was pretty cool, and working with those guys are very professional, unreal. So I would say that they stood out to me. They still stand out to me just because of the level of professionalism and just how tough those dudes were, man. Yeah, they are unbelievably tough.
What team were you assigned to, Jared?
Team 3. Team 3.
Yeah.
So we did some cool deployments to a bunch of different places in the Middle East, obviously, Yemen, Jordan. I won't talk too much about what was going on around there. I was actually overseas when Benghazi happened. We were rotating back out. Remember the Benghazi strikes killed Ty Woods and those guys. Ty Woods was actually a BUD/S instructor of mine, Glenn Doherty and all them. But all of that being said, we did some cool stuff in that area around the Horn of Africa, some anti-piracy stuff, and just some things in that area, ship takedowns and different things like that. Working with other counterterrorism units from other countries, and then also working just solo on our own. More recently, y'all probably heard about this in the news. Their names are in the news. I won't use their names. I didn't know them well. I'd met them both one time, I think last summer or summer before. Sometime we were putting them through training. But anyway, all that being said, 2 team guys, 2 SEALs just died recently doing a vessel takedown in some terrible seas, some high seas. And so we did that same stuff was going on back, even when I was in, 2005 to 2012, go plats, oil platforms, all that stuff. So we got to do some of those missions in the Middle East that are still ongoing now. And then the best deployment by far would have been deployment to Afghanistan. Obviously, Iraq, Sadr City, that kind of area. I kind of caught the tail end of some of that stuff, but not like some of the guys got, like Chris Kyle and those guys who were there. Everybody knows Chris. I think he's all over the media. He died, obviously, not long ago.
Did you ever get to meet him?
Now. Do what?
Did you ever meet him?
I did, yeah. So he was at Team 3 he was at SEAL Team 3 when I checked in.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so he was at Team 3 when I checked in, and then he went over to sniper cell, the advanced sniper cell. And so me being a sniper, when we'd go through that, our unit level training and our professional development, which is for the individual, I would go over to LRTI, long range target engagement, which is or long range target interdiction, which is the advanced sniper stuff, and he was one of the instructors over there. So anyway, that's where I spent any time that I spent with him was a little bit at Team 3 and then over to LRTI. But all of that being said, Afghanistan, because when we went to Afghanistan, Iraq was kind of dying down here, and the only reason you go in is to go to war. To do the stuff that we do is to go to war, right?
Right.
Man, it was the Wild West. It was, you wake up, you work out, you do an op, it's gonna, kill or be killed. I get to kill somebody today, possibly, and they're gonna be a bad guy. I mean, you're not worried about stupid stuff like cell phone bills or, just the normal everyday life that really sometimes more problematic. It is complete freedom. If I didn't have a wife at home at the time, I would live there.
Yeah.
It would be, it's unbelievably awesome because it is truly freedom.
So it's get up, train, stay alive, rinse and repeat.
Yeah.
That's it. Rinse. I mean, just every day, it's like whatever decision I make, and me and a guy, a buddy of mine, he's still in the SEAL teams. We're talking about this recently. Like if you shoot at a guy and miss, or you're watching guys, especially from a sniper hide, you get to see how people respond a lot of times. And watching it, it's like, man, if that guy would have just done this, I wouldn't have killed him.
Right.
So you actually learn a lot, you know, by watching other people, and then also what you do. You know, it's like, hey, you know, I didn't do anything important there. God just took care of me. I should be dead because I did this instead of this. That is complete freedom. That is complete freedom. And we don't view it that way. My wife doesn't view it that way, right? She's like, I'd rather deal with a cell phone bill or insurance or something,
Yeah.
you know. And me, I would rather not. I would rather not deal with that. Now that I have kids, it is a little bit different because I don't want my kids to have to experience that. I think one thing we forget in our nation, and not to make this anything other than, you know, what we're talking about, but we have this idea that we have rights. Everybody's got rights. Everybody got rights. No, you don't have rights. Right? You got a Bill of Rights that outline the liberties that you have. And the thing that's different about liberties or about freedoms is we always say freedom ain't free. Well, it ain't free because somebody's paying for it, right? So you can do different things in this country. But the other thing is there's a responsibility on you. That's the difference in liberty and the difference in rights. The Bill of Rights just outlines liberties that we have, but those liberties take responsibility. I am responsible for what I have, and it's a scriptural principle because who's the kings of this nation? It's not law enforcement, it's not the governors, it's not Congress, senators. Those are just elected officials. Once it starts it out, we the people, right? And we all heard the saying, "Heavy is the crown." Do you know where that saying actually comes from? It's heavy as the crown. It's the burden of being the king. But Jesus says, if don't let any one of you consider yourselves a teacher or a leader, because if you lead one of these little ones astray, it's better you had a millstone tied around your neck and thrown in the ocean.
Right.
He says it's better that you drown. For us, we are leaders. We the people. We are the kings of this nation, and yet what do? We give our kingship over to somebody else oftentimes. Not, and it's not. I'm not talking about the people we vote in. I'm talking about you as an individual. You are your biggest problem. You have liberty, and there's a responsibility with that liberty. So that's probably what I'm more talking about with that freedom. You have liberty to take life. You have liberty to protect your buddies. You have liberty, and that looks different than what we think about when we think of rights. And so it's hard a lot of times for us to understand. I don't know if that made sense what I said, but that's kind of
Yeah. So is that sort of like just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something? Is that kind of what you're saying?
that's exactly it. You know, just because I can doesn't mean I should, and just because I'm scared doesn't mean that I shouldn't do it. You know, but we live in a society that allows us to make decisions not based on our liberty or even the necessity of the situation, but based on our feelings,
Right.
not based
right.
on strictly survival. And I guess that's what I'm saying. That's why it felt like true freedom, true liberty, because the decisions I was making were real world, everyday decisions, and they were going to end me or make me, right? And the Lord had laid them out in front of me. And we don't have that in our culture now. And I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing. I'm just saying I enjoyed that about combat deployments.
And the average person's not going to. I mean, well, I say they're not going to understand that, but it's probably harder for them to understand and see it that way that you would. And I can. That's
For me, it would be way harder had I not experienced it.
Right,
you know, and
right,
it's
right.
almost like you can't describe it, if that makes sense. It's not that you love killing people. It's not that you, which killing bad guys is a good thing, right? You know, I don't lose sleep at night over that. But it's not that you love killing people. It's not that you love losing buddies, because we lost plenty of buddies. It's that you love the liberty, the freedom that you have in literally what I do is I might live or die today, you know, and it's in God. If you just walk through life, hey, it's in God's hands. It's truly in God's hands. You're not relying on a paycheck or a health insurance or whatever it is. It's truly in God's hands. And there's a lot of liberty to that. There's a lot of freedom in that. And of everything that I experienced, that is what I enjoyed the most. And then the other aspect of what I missed the most, if you're talking about deployment, since we kind of give you a general rundown of deployments, this is going to sound weird. I don't know if it, but we lost a lot of friends. And as a Christian man, I mean, I know if I die, I win because I'm with Jesus. If I live, I win because that means I won, right? So you can't lose. But I won't say that I would gladly give up my life for any of my buddies because I love my little girls and I'm glad that I have my wife and my daughters and I get to spend time here with them. But that is the hardest thing, knowing that my buddies have died and dudes are still continuing to die. Uh, and I'm not there to be able to die instead of them. And I think that that's a struggle with
Survivor
probably
guilt.
guys in our community, maybe. But I know that's a struggle for me.
Yeah, I talk to a lot of guys that feel that that's a theme. You know, when I say theme, a lot of guys feel that way. You know, and especially it's been and done things that you have done. I hear that a lot.
Yeah, I mean, that's, if it could be me instead of them,
Yeah,
yeah, I would do that. It would be hard to do because I love my girls and I would miss them. But what kind of dad would they have if their dad, what kind of man would you be if you weren't willing to lay your life down for those that you love? Because you know what it means? Either you don't love them and you're lying, um, or you're a coward.
yeah.
The only two things that exist. You do love them, but you're too cowardly to do anything about it. And so that's probably, if I say the greatest struggle, the thing that I desire is to be there suffering with the guys, right? Suffering produces, what is it? Romans 5, I believe, chapter
Perseverance.
5, verses 1 through 4, maybe, or maybe it's verses 4 through 8. But either way, suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance produces endurance, and endurance produces hope. I believe are the thing that's laid out. If I didn't screw it up too bad there, I kind of know the Bible a little bit.
No, you're right though.
I've got about 1,000 questions for you just on all this stuff alone. But I'm
Shoot it.
You're talking about your buddies and dying for your buddies, especially those that you don't know what their condition is. You don't know what their personal relationship with Jesus Christ is either. And I've got a thing I say in a lot of my law enforcement presentations that I do. It's and this is just from knowing my personal relationship with Jesus Christ. I say, I don't want to die, but I ain't scared to neither.
Oh, that's right.
And that's the way I look at it. But you don't know the condition of your teammates sometimes. Sometimes that's not talked about. Sometimes we don't talk about things like that in a setting like me and Eric were in for years in a law enforcement setting, especially a team setting. With a SWAT team, especially with a team like you were involved in, the SEAL teams. Sometimes you don't talk about things that you need to talk about between men.
Yeah, no, and I would totally agree, and even one step further. I mean, if you really look at it, what's Paul say? Mimic me as I mimic Christ. We look at that, and at face value, our culture, that's an unbelievably arrogant statement to say. Copy me as I copy Christ. If Jared Hudson said this, people would hear that. I know my wife would be like, "What are you saying? No, we're just going to copy Christ, not copy you, right?" But Paul said, "Mimic me as I mimic Christ." Man, that is a heavy, heavy statement. That guy is so humble. Guy is so humble that he says, "Don't do what I do. Do what I do when I do what Christ did." Right? That's right. So it's a humble statement, but it's also a heavy statement, a heavy burden, because that means I better be doing what Christ does as people are following me. Right?
We're that earthly example.
The reason Paul says that. Go ahead.
I said we're that earthly example. I mean, Jesus Christ isn't walking the streets of the earth now, so they don't have that example. We, as Christians, especially as Christian men, we're that living example that people have to look at, and that's what Paul was saying, mimic him as he mimics Christ.
Yeah.
We have to be that carbon copy. But here's the thing that we look at, because and this is a problem with, in my opinion, with say the Church of the West. I'll just say, like, Western European Christian mindset, for lack of a better word. We let our niceness become a vice almost, right? When we look at death, you say, I don't want to die, but I ain't scared to die, right? That's G.K. Chesterton. That's a quote he says. He says, you drink death desire life like water, but drink death like wine, right? You're on the precipice of life or death, and I want to live, but I embrace the willingness and the ability to die. That's the only way that you survive, and that's what G.K. Chesterton was talking about, as a soldier, if he's going to survive. But look at what Jesus did. If we really want to be like Jesus, Jesus didn't what's it Maximus in Gladiator, says that what the emperor tell him. He said, death smiles at every man. All a man can do is smile back, right?
Yep.
Jesus didn't even smile back. He knocked death's teeth out, keys, and he conquered death and rose from the dead. So he took it one step further. And we ain't even got to do that.
Yeah.
All we have to do is do exactly like you said. Hey, look, I want to be here with my family as much as possible. But if it means that I die, so be it. I'm being more like Christ. Christ said, pick up your cross and follow me. Die to yourself daily. When you pick up a cross, that's it. That's a heavy burden. But what's Jesus say? My burden is easy, my yoke is light. So it's easier than the burden of what we talked about earlier, the liberty of living under the lordship of Christ, which I don't remember how many times it is, but he's declared Lord more times than he is Savior. We often hear Savior, but I think it's less than 20 times that he says Savior. It's actually Lord. So when we are under the lordship of Christ, there's an unbelievable amount of liberty and freedom. And I at least have some small sense of what that should feel like just with those combat deployments. Sorry to derail all that.
No,
Yeah,
that's
you're
good.
good, man. I like it.
That's really good.
Answer.
I was trying to get Andy a little more, I know he's got 1,000 questions too. Thomas is normally the one that's got 1,000
Andy, they
questions.
stuck you over there in the back, man. I mean,
Do you see
look
that
like
face?
they're all in
Yeah.
the forefront.
You see
That's
that?
the only
You see that
window.
face?
You
That's
see,
all we
like,
can get.
right here, that little window right there
That's it.
for Andy Hughes.
Yeah.
I said the other day, I don't know if we're going to, enjoy videoing our podcast because Andy and I do have a face for radio.
Yeah.
I mean, it's,
There you go. That's right. That's right.
what
Hey,
it is.
I will tell you this. Now, I haven't heard Andy talk too much over there, but you definitely have a radio.
Are you talking about Andy? Andy's got a radio
you
voice.
opened up earlier.
Yeah.
I was like, I could listen. I could listen to this podcast driving down the road.
I
and
think
not have
most
a-
people listen all the way through our podcast just because of Andy and Eric's voices. Like I've heard people say from both, like I would listen to that.
Specifically say that.
I'm not really sure how to take that, but okay.
I was, and I listen to myself sometimes, and I've been off to a couple of schools. I was off at a SWAT commander school one time, and they nicknamed me Big Country Bama, right off, because it's just so, country. But I was talking to a lady in New Hampshire the other day, trying to set up an off-duty detail up there, and she said, "Oh, by the way, I love your accent."
That's funny.
Well, all right. So nobody else is asking. I'm gonna go ahead and ask. All right. It's obvious that you're strongly rooted in your faith in Christ. That's apparent. So let's go back to and I kind of briefly hit this. How did that help you in all your deployments? Were you able to maintain that? I mean, obviously you were, but you're in an environment where you got a bunch of type A. You got alpha guys, and you know how that goes. We understand that around here. How were you able to maintain that, and did it help you out in your time in the SEAL teams?
No, it actually did, and it's even helped me out beyond. Because I was in the SEAL team for a short amount of time. As far as I got a good bit of combat experience, but as far as buddies that were in, guys have been in for 20 years, 25 years, retiring out, 15, 18 years, spent 10 years over at Dam Neck, which is SEAL Team 6 or whatever. And guys that have they got a lot more experience than I. I have very small amount of experience compared to my colleagues when it comes to being a SEAL. But I still to this day, I actually got a call from a guy last night in the SEAL teams. He's a commanding officer of a very elite unit, asking for help with something because of my faith. I still work at the Navy SEAL Foundation. They asked me to come in and do things to promote what they're trying to do to help team guys as they get out. So I would say even. It definitely carries you while you're in. But even now that I'm out, people seeing that, and it's not me. It's not Jared Hudson. Jared Hudson ain't nothing. I'd be the biggest piece of crap in the world. I'd be a fornicating, murdering, turd if it wasn't for Jesus Christ who saved me and living under the lordship of Jesus Christ, who keeps me from being that person that I would become if it wasn't for him. So he's the one that gives favor. I think he said about Joseph, it said that God was with him, even though he's in Potiphar's house and his wife did all that stuff. And he got thrown in prison. He was with him in prison. And the Lord gave him uh, favor in the eyes of all around. We see that happen all the way up to the point that he becomes as powerful as Pharaoh, right? Pharaoh says, you have everything in your hand with the exception of the kingship of Egypt. So I would say that favor that is the hand of God uh, is how I made it. Because you play, they want to play these dumb, drinking games, go to strip clubs, go to all of these things, and it doesn't mean that I most certainly haven't lived a perfect life, and I did things that I'm ashamed of. But early on in my career, the Lord gave me opportunities, I guess, to not have to partake in those things and still maintain clout, and gave me an early, got to go to sniper school uh, really quickly, was able to do that. That was kind of my cup of tea. Grew up hunting in Alabama, loved sniper school. It was a blast. It was probably the most fun training ever. Um, Met my wife during that time, and we wound up getting married. So got a wife early on, so I'm not running around with that country accent picking up every chick in California, which is easy to do. When you're a SEAL and you got a country accent,
Yeah.
it's easy to have women want to talk to you, especially if you're in the wrong places. So my wife met her through my family back at home. My mama was worried; she was scared to death that I was going to marry a California girl. So
Yeah.
they were always looking for me somebody, and they found my wife Lauren. We got together, got married early on, and then I did a combat deployment pretty early in my career in the SEAL teams, and had the opportunity to go overseas and fight in combat and kill people. And that is kind of, for lack of a better word, if you have that, that's clout amongst guys who maybe they don't have that, or they have a little bit, or you've at least proven yourself. Because otherwise you prove yourself with stupid, drinking games and bar and, strip clubs and all
Right.
that. I didn't have to experience that like I've talked with some of my buddies who had to experience that. And I just look at that as the Lord placing me in certain positions to give me favor early on. And so that's what carried me through. And then when people saw that, they're like, "Hey, this dude's a Bible thumper," is what they would call you.
Right.
This dude's a Bible thumper, but he ain't afraid to dust somebody. And that's kind of that was my thing. So
That's cool. That's really good. I was gonna ask you just about your faith in the military, and that you mentioned some things like people reaching out to you and stuff like that. But what was that like? Can you talk more about like what that was like? You said people called you Bible thumper and stuff. I mean, do you think that was there a lot of persecution for you being a Christian or anything, or like?
no, that's if I'd feel like a pussy if I call. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to say that.
No, you're good. You're fine. Don't worry
We have
about it.
this.
I would no, not persecuted. I mean, I would argue that it's nothing we go through here
Real
is
persecution.
persecution, really. I mean, maybe made fun of a little bit, but like I said, the Lord gave me favor. He provided. Now you look at Joseph. I was just talking about Joseph. He was persecuted. Joker was thrown in prison for something he didn't do. He was thrown in a hole because his brothers didn't like him. Maybe he was a little bit arrogant with his presentation of his dream. Maybe. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, let's say you could go that route. That Joker was persecuted. He was thrown in a hole, and it was because of his brother Reuben that they didn't kill him, and they sold him to the Ishmaelites that came through, who sold him to the Egyptians. That is persecution. Getting made fun of a little bit, or feeling a little uneasy because they don't like the fact that I read the Bible. No, piss on you. That's not persecution.
Right. It's not.
That's
I love the way he
man.
puts that. I love that. You don't even edit that out. I
No,
love
I'm not.
it. Man.
No, that's great because
Not at all. I don't feel I was persecuted at all and
That's
most
good.
of those guys would claim to be Christians. I would say 90%, maybe 85% of the SEAL teams, the guys that I ran into, would claim to be Christians, whether they were. Now, we've got a lot of different sects, SECTS, right,
Right.
of Christianity. They'll lump Mormons under that. I don't believe Mormons are Christians, right? I got friends that are Mormons. They might hear this podcast. There's not a denomination. You do not believe in the same Jesus I believe in.
Right.
You got Catholics. As you go down the list, I'm just kind of lumping them all in that. We still all had the same sort of mindset. It wasn't like you're at Yale University and nobody believes in God because they're all smarter than God in their minds, right? There were a lot of guys who claimed to be Christians. There weren't a lot of guys who lived as if they were Christians. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not a level of persecution just because you're not living like those who sin. Does that make? I don't know if that makes
that's
sense.
really good, and that's something that we had talked about before. even what real persecution is. And I think I had said, and a couple of us had said, that Americans have not experienced that.
No.
Like it's not the same at all what we experience over here. You know, you don't get the job, you don't get the car, you know, whatever happens. Yeah, we might experience some level of suffering, but we don't experience persecution.
I think we experience some level of discomfort.
Yeah,
good
discomfort,
level.
maybe not even
probably.
suffering. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I would think Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
Joe Rogan said recently. I forgot who he was talking to. He said, "Man, I've never seen anybody. Everything. It doesn't matter what you believe. As crazy it is, Scientology." And he said, "Doesn't matter what you believe. It is hell. You can't go after it. You can't make fun of it." He said, but Joe Rogan was saying this on his podcast. He said, but Christians are gone after more than anybody I have ever seen. So there is that aspect to it, but that's not necessarily persecution as we envision it. Does that make sense? Like you said, it might be a level of discomfort, and there's probably truth to it. Truth that we are targeted because we're not of the world, right? We're of Christ. But that doesn't. When I think persecution, I think when we were
North
doing
Korea.
a project in Burma, whole villages were wiped out by the government because they were Christians. And I remember probably the top 5 worst things. This is number 1. I would say what Hamas did in Israel. We're over in Israel working and seeing what Hamas did to the Israelis is probably number 3 or number 4 that I've seen. But number 1 is them taking babies, like my 2-year-old girl, naked, and throwing the babies alive into fire, a pile of other burning bodies and babies. That to me, seeing that in that experience because they were Christians, that's what I think of when I think of persecution.
Yeah, losing your life for your faith, I believe, is what that's persecution.
That's what you think of, at least, or the Christians that had to. Their kids were being taken in the Roman Empire. What was it? The guy's name started with a D. I think it was around 145 A.D. I can't remember who the Roman emperor was then, but they were legally taking the kids, the children of Christians, saying, if you don't deny your faith, we're going to take your kids. They were coming in as the government, taking the children, and then they were feeding them to lions and letting gladiators chop them up in the arenas. And people were not denying Christ. They were giving their children up. You talk about Job 13:15 lived out. Though he slay me, I will trust him. Holy crap. Taking their kids. I can't think of anything else. Now, does that mean that those Christians were right? No, I believe that I could tell you what Jared Hudson would do, and I believe that my faith I believe that this is the right thing to do because God's given me those children to defend. I'm going to kill till I'm drowning in a pool of my own blood before you take my kids and feed them to a lion. Sort of thing, right? That being said, those Christians trusted God so much that they said, he's not the God of the dead. God says, I'm the God of the living, not the God of the dead. But what did Jesus do? Jesus came and he died so he could be the God of the living and the dead. So they trusted God so much to say, we know he can bring our children back, just like Abraham. And they did not deny Christ. That is unbelievably amazing. And some of them did, obviously, if you read any of the historical stories, but that is persecution.
Yeah.
That is
Yeah. And I think of like communist Russia, Soviet Russia, all of those things, like the things that they all had to go through. I mean, it's all throughout history. You do, like you said, you just go back and read a book, about that time. I mean, there's a great one called Tortured for Christ. And he talks about all the atrocities and things. And so, like that to me, as well, I'm sure as you guys too, that's persecution. What Paul talks about in Philippians, and like Paul's in jail, and even though he's being persecuted for what he believes in, he says he still believes that the gospel is being spread. Even those people that are persecuting him, he's like when I say persecuting, I mean those people that are speaking out against him while he's being put in jail. And he says it's like people lumping even more misery on top of the misery he's already experiencing. And he says, as long as the gospel is being preached, even those people that speak out against me, as long as they're preaching Jesus, that's all that matters. And like that's like the mindset we've got to have as Christians, is that persecution is not discomfort. And when we do experience that, it's got to be with the mindset that he's the God of the living and the dead, and it doesn't matter what it is, as long as he's being proclaimed. That's the main thing.
There you go.
And so that's really good.
Ready to get saved.
That's really good.
Thomas is he's the associate pastor where I go to church, so he's got a little bit of knowledge behind him too.
I really want to talk about Covenant Rescue Group. I'm like itching over
well,
here.
yeah,
I know
we
you guys are
got
too.
one more.
I know you want to talk about things. I'm just letting you know. I'm itching to talk about
We got one more level to get. Jared, tell us about, when you did. You've already told us a little bit about why you ended up getting out of the SEAL teams, but after you got out of the SEAL teams, how did you end up rolling into that law enforcement career? And tell us about how the Shooting Institute actually came into play.
Yeah, so so real quick, the Shooting Institute actually started with a buddy out of Indiana before I got out of the SEAL teams. Him and another guy started it, and we were kind of partners in that. And we just did said, hey, going to get out, do some private pistol classes and whatever, right, for civilians, maybe some law enforcement guys. And we did that. And all we'd do, I'd go to Indiana. These guys put a class together. We'd make, $5 or $6 grand in a weekend. I'd leave with a handful of cash and, go, and we just kind of partner in this business. Well, got called on to do some anti-piracy work during that time. I tried doing some of that. It was just very difficult with where I was at medically and going through that process as they're, still working on the med retirement and all that stuff, and me going overseas. It wound up being very difficult. And so when I started doing that, I said, hey, I'm going to break off and start my own company, and I'll just be the Shooting Institute Alabama. Y'all have the Shooting Institute Indiana. I'll be the Shooting Institute Alabama. That's kind of how it originally broke out. So I started the company so I could do my own contracts. Couldn't do those overseas contracts. It was just too difficult with me going through the medical process. It was at the time. And they were just like anti-piracy, contracts and some, just stuff here and there in the Middle East. And I'd met John Samaniego, who's the Shelby. He's the Shelby County Sheriff right now.
Yeah. I knew John. I knew John
and,
when he was at Tuscaloosa PD back in the 90s. Yeah, I've known John since
yeah,
probably
there you
about
go. So,
91, 92.
and I like John Sammy. Actually, somebody recently told me I don't think he likes me very much. I don't know why, but he's the one who got me into law enforcement.
Yeah.
But I met John Samaniego when I was working with a West Coast fugitive task force with the Marshal Service. They would come down and use our kill house in the SEAL teams, and I met some of those guys there, and met their chief and all that. And John came out for some sheriff's or chief's conference or something, and they introduced him to him. Hey, this guy's from where you live at, in the Birmingham, Alabama area, and he gave me a card. This was maybe 2 years prior, I don't know. And I happened to have his card in a cruise box, and I thought, you know what? Maybe I need to just look at doing local law enforcement. And so I reached out to him, and he got me in the process, and I was hired by Shelby County Sheriff's Office, went to the academy, and actually, to be honest with you, I didn't mind the job. I enjoyed it quite a bit. My medical stuff still made it hard working, night shifts some, and then rotating over. They moved me to where I could work days, but I would go pick up people to jail and I'd bring them back, or I'd answer calls during the day, just 5 days a week as I was going through the medical thing, and finishing my degree, and had some business opportunities open up that I was not going to be able to pursue and be a full-time law enforcement officer at the same time. So that's why I left full-time law enforcement at Shelby County and pursued those business ventures. So the Shooting Institute at the time, so the Shooting Institute in Indiana, kind of waned. They just did some NRA classes for guys. But for me, the business opportunities I had were government contracts and different contracts with agencies all over the nation, law enforcement agencies, and then also DoD contracts that I was able to work on as a sub, and then obtain some as a prime contractor. And that's kind of how the Shooting Institute got going. That was around 2015, 2016 timeframe. We came in under, there's a guy named Robert Goodner. I don't know if y'all know Robert Goodner.
Yeah,
He was at the
I know. Yeah, he was lieutenant colonel. He retired from DPS, Alabama DPS. Robert's a good friend of mine.
So Robert actually asked if we could put on a SWAT course for him, maybe 2016. I don't know. And I'm doing contracts at this time. I'm doing training. I do just whatever I can do to grow the business. Again, that's why I left full-time law enforcement. And he asked if we do a SWAT course. We put together the basic tactical officer certification for him, and did that for the state for a few years until he finally left, and that went away. We still issue the BTOC certification, but it's not paid for by the state anymore. So, all that being said, that's kind of what got the Shooting Institute to where it is now, to where, I still teach for Naval Special Warfare as a sub to the prime contractor that has it. So I still teach for the SEAL teams. Taught every special operations unit, the Air Force PJs, MARSOC Raiders, the Green Berets, EOD, all these SOCOM units. We do pistol, carbine, CQB, a lot of conventional units, every branch of the military, if not every federal law enforcement agency, dang close to it, at least the main ones that people know have attended class. So the Lord just really opened the doors for that. And we got away from civilian training, not because we don't like it. I mean, I'll do the same thing for civilians that I do for the government, right? But the problem is civilians, they don't pay like the government does.
Yeah, right.
Mama and the babies can't eat based on a guy who's going to argue with you over a $500 pistol class or whatever it is. So business wise, and we primarily focused on that, and that's kind of the Shooting Institute. That's how we got it going, and that's what I've been doing full time since 2017, I guess. So I did a pretty cool thing, animal control. It's NACOA, National Wildlife Control Officer Association. We culled animals all over the world, Guam. I mean, I killed me and another guy that worked on a project with me. We killed 1,700, I think it was 1,700 pigs on Naval Base Guam in 7 nights.
Right.
So, I mean,
Wow, that's a lot of pig.
I killed thousands of whitetail, and the guys that ran that organization, White Buffalo, Tony DiNicola, he became a friend, a buddy of mine in the SEAL teams. It's his father-in-law. He runs his organization, and he's I think he's Yale PhD guy in biology, and worked on projects all over with darting deer, culling deer, pigs, all, and that. So that's what we. That was one of my main contracts that I got just because of the marksmanship level, and I helped design a marksmanship program for them, and I still teach that marksmanship program to a lot of those people that fall under that NACOA certification.
Well, I know you've come down to the Houston County area, actually for Henry County, because you taught some of the guys that were on my team, BTOC.
That was now.
That's a few years back. I think you did one recently here, not too long ago, didn't you?
Yeah, it was like last year or the year before. Eric Blankenship, who attended one of the first ones we hosted under Robert Goodner. That's how I met Eric. And I know he started a company and did some of that stuff, and all, but he ran for sheriff and he won down there. Is that Henry County? Is he Henry County Sheriff?
That's Henry County. Yeah.
That's say that again.
That's Henry County. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So he won. He ran for sheriff and won. When he won, after whatever their inauguration thing is, whatever in January, he hit me up in February and said, "Hey man, we need to do a SWAT training for our guys." And some other guys said, "Hey, more than happy to do it." We worked something out. And Covenant Rescue Group at the time was just came on full time with them, and I said, "Hey, we can. This is what it will cost, but if you want to cover 50% of the cost, the nonprofit will cover the other 50% if we can run an operation with y'all in the Henry County area." And that's kind of what set up, one, their training, and two, the operation with Covenant Rescue Group that they did, the child exploitation sting, where I think we arrested 6 down there with them, if I remember right, during that operation.
Well, let's go ahead and just use that segue right there to go right into Covenant Rescue. That's what I really wanted to get into.
Hey there, I just wanted to take a second to say thank you so much for watching this episode of The Shepherd Station. If you feel this has added some value to your life, it would mean so much to us if you would share this episode with someone else. It helps us so much when you do that. It would go a long way in supporting our mission to help men become better fathers, husbands, and leaders. Also, if you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button and give us a like. If you're listening to us through Spotify or Apple Podcasts or anywhere else you listen to podcasts, follow us, leave us a review, and let us know how we're doing. We want to hear from you. All right, that's all I've got. Thank you again for watching.